All right, so we have George Janko talking about why he left Impulsive and some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes that we haven't heard about. And once again, this just confirms that Logan Paul is a terrible person that treats the people around him like garbage. No surprise there. And George, he had Mike Malak on, which I'm sure Logan is pissed about, because Mike doing this podcast, obviously George was going to talk about this stuff and talk about his falling out with Logan and how he's treated poorly. And Mike, he was trying to defend Logan a little bit, but not much. And he's mostly just trying to defend himself. So Logan's going to think that Mike didn't do enough here and is going to be upset with him, especially because this podcast is getting a lot of attention and people are sharing clips from it and talking about how terrible Logan is. So I'm glad this podcast happened, and it does seem like Mike actually feels bad about how things ended with George. Like, if you remember when George walked off the Bobby Lee episode, Mike was the only one to defend him, and Logan was just talking shit about George for leaving and was acting like it was unprofessional, which is kind of ridiculous considering the podcast is with Bobby Lee, who is the most unprofessional person ever. Like, he's walked out of shows before, and he's just known to be really inappropriate. Like, if you've seen any of his morning talk show appearances, he's always grabbing people and touching people, even when they say not to, and he just makes him really uncomfortable, which he was doing to George during this podcast, if you remember. Like, he, at one point, took his dick out and made George smell it, and then also, apparently, he kept trying to grab George's dick. And I remember at one point, George had to tell him to stop touching me. Like, he got fed up with it.
Question suck, left me on red. You suck. First of all, don't touch me.
Yeah.
Do not touch me.
My bad.
Thank you.
All right. But,
Then also George talked about recently how they had cut some moments from the podcast, probably where Bobby was acting inappropriate, and it made George look worse because then it looked like he had walked out just because he got offended by the jokes. Then George also said that Logan told him he needed to apologize to Bobby, and if he didn't, then he'd be kicked off the show. And Logan also told him that he shouldn't talk as much during the podcast unless they have no guest on.
Who was the first person that jumped off the couch and said, George just left, that was not good, we have to fix the situation?
Did they not cut shit that you should have stood up for me and said, hey, you can't cut that shit? That's going to make him look like an idiot for leaving.
Okay, numerous times on the show, which I'm sure a number of shows do, cut things that we believe will protect the integrity or reputation of the guest.
That protected nobody but him.
No, of the guest. That's what I'm trying.
Well, what about the guy that you break bread with, bro?
But
I had a problem with the way that Logan and you were kind of gassing him to keep doing. He started the episode putting his balls in my face. I let that one go. Then every 2 seconds, he kept grabbing my dick.
I don't think...
How would you feel if a man that has his back completely towards you, that only turns around to grab your dick...
Right.
Talk shit to your face, and you can't smack or beat the living brakes off of this guy. Because Logan makes me apologize to this man, or I don't have a job on Impulsive anymore. How fucking crazy is that?
I don't think I understood. I can only speak for myself.
Bro, it's not a group chat.
I hope you can understand
it's not a group chat.
No. I'm talking about during the episode.
And I said, Mike, this is all that happens, and you said verbatim, you said, it's our fault for not telling you this, but me and Logan are really the ones who should be talking to the guest. You are really there for a boys only episode. So while I get sexually harassed, my other co-host is trying to fire me, and you're trying to leverage me to be quiet during other guests. And then on my birthday, you guys shot 3 episodes, so I couldn't show up.
I just think...
On my 30th birthday, you shot 3 episodes. Bro. That's crazy. It was on the calendar for months.
And if Logan's lapdog, Mike, isn't denying any of this, then it must be true. And it just sounds like Logan. I mean, it's not that surprising. And towards the end, you could tell that Logan wanted to get rid of George. He was just completely done with him, especially after the whole argument they had about religion, where it got really awkward. And it was clear Logan was just trying to start shit with him and get him worked up and pissed off and trying to make a fool out of him, which ended up backfiring. Most people thought Logan was being the dick there. So it's obvious George wouldn't be around much longer, especially once he started his own podcast, which of course Logan wasn't too happy about. But at least he'd use that as a way to push George out of Impulsive. Like, George said that he got an offer from Celsius to do a brand deal with them for his podcast, and Logan told him if he wanted to do that, then he would have to leave Impulsive because, Celsius is a competitor to Prime, which is really hypocritical from Logan because if you remember, he got in a giant argument with his brother about something like this. Because one of Jake's boxing events was sponsored by Celsius, and Logan had nothing to do with it. Like, he didn't need to be there, and he probably wouldn't have been there, but he saw it as an opportunity to get free advertising. So he was trying to walk out and be ringside with a Prime bottle, but of course the people running the event told him he couldn't do it because it would just make no sense. Like, what did they get out of it? And it's a competitor. So Logan threw a temper tantrum over it. And then also at the same time, he has the audacity to tell George on his own podcast that he can't be a sponsor of Celsius. And also apparently Logan was barely paying George to do Impulsive. And he said for a year he wasn't even making anything. And same thing with Mike. He said he's doing it for a couple of years without making anything. And then also George said, well, Logan was telling him not to take the Celsius deal. At the same time, Logan would be flexing how much money he's making from Prime.
When Logan came after me for my religion, the show hit rock bottom and we weren't getting paid. So I had to start my own show because we're not making money on this show and I'm getting pushed out of this show.
Well, at the time we weren't making.
And by the way, let's not forget that for a year and a half I didn't get paid.
No, and I didn't get paid for years.
Okay.
Until I got paid.
Okay,
right.
so
But you did make a sizable amount of money on the show.
And by the way, always
like,
grateful. I was always grateful.
Something like that?
Yeah, I don't like to talk about money, but I was always grateful. Always grateful. I think anybody could see that. But when I got pushed out, and I'm seeing that I'm getting pushed out, and I start my own show, do you know what my final straw was?
What?
I got my show going, and then not only was I controlled and pushed around on Impulsive, but then Logan's making calls and directing my show. And I'm saying, hey, man, you can't tell me what to do on my own show. That's not okay.
What's that about?
He told me that I couldn't take Celsius. And then I said, hey,
he
man.
didn't tell you that you couldn't take Celsius.
Messages.
No, he didn't tell you that you couldn't take Celsius. He
says if I take Celsius, I'm not a part of Impulsive.
Then he told you that if you take Celsius, that you cannot continue to be on Impulsive, which is the core driver for Prime, as you're going to continue to funnel viewership from the Impulsive show back to your show, which promotes a competitive product.
Yeah.
He also told you that if you wait 6 months after the deal's done, you're more than welcome to rejoin the show if you need to make money.
But they're always trying to find a way to push me out.
I don't.
You know what he told me? I think that was
this is a
guy who's this is a guy who's sending us screenshots of $11 million a week that he's making. Okay, and on top of that, we never got any money from Prime, and we own that show. So technically, we should have gotten a percentage of that. I never asked for it like the way you did. I stayed the fuck out of it. I didn't care because I'm grateful for what I'm making. I'm gonna go start my own business. Like, I will take half the deal that Celsius gives me, half. If you want to put it on the table for my show, a quarter, work with me. He says, I won't pay you a dime. You're here because of me. And then I said, well, what do you want me to do for my bills, bro? I got no money. And he says, go have your rich dad pay for it.
Listen,
that's fighting words, bro. Look at me. That's fighting words, bro. You don't bring up somebody's father.
Would you say that the way that you handled it from a word standpoint was mature, acceptable?
What did I say? That I beat the brakes off of him?
Correct.
If he was in front of me, I would have swung at him.
But that's what I'm trying to say. We were at a point where no one was speaking properly to each other.
Yeah, so Mike was defending Logan quite a bit there. I wonder if he had to get permission from him to do this podcast. You know, I feel like he probably had to ask Logan about it. And if he didn't, then, like I said, Logan will be really upset. Because obviously Mike had to know this would be a bad look for Logan. And a guy, Dylan Dennis, tweeting about him again. Like he said, hey, George, we should sue Logan for allowing a guest to sexually assault you in the workplace and covering it up through editing. Then he also said, hey, WWE, he tagged them. He said, do you condemn Logan Paul for letting his best friend get sexually assaulted while laughing and threatening him with termination if he says anything, then deleting the footage and firing him? Interesting. Yeah, so I don't know if it'll get serious enough to where Logan has to address it or anything like that, but I feel like he could take some shots at George on his podcast because he does like talking shit about him. I mean, even after George left, Logan continued to trash him on his podcast. So I feel like there's a good chance he could talk about this, and he'll probably just yell at Mike for going on there. So that's about it for this video, but if you guys want more content from me, make sure to check out my Patreon account. I post a new video on there every week, and this Monday I'm going to be talking about the time Tim Dillon humbled Whitney Cummings during this really cringy podcast. And last week on there, I talked about how Theo Vaughn is a cheapskate, and there's just a ton of other stuff to go through. There are over 70 videos at this point, so if you're a fan of the channel, I highly recommend it. Make sure you check it out. I'll put a link in the description.